Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the harrowing first chapter of HB, The Wake of Catastrophe by Cyd Webster Beacham. And it drops us directly into the immediate, chaotic aftermath of a world-shattering event. So the story kicks off with this really ominous passage from the book of Daniel. And let me tell you, this isn't just for dramatic effect. It immediately frames this disaster in these mythical, almost biblical terms, suggesting a cataclysm so huge it feels like a prophecy coming true.
Okay, so what did this apocalypse actually look like? Well, for 3 full days, the world was just plunged into this unrelenting chaos. The source material describes a planet that is just utterly consumed by disaster.
Yeah, some people just straight up called it Armageddon. But for those who study eschatology, that's the study of the end times, this wasn't some big surprise. It was a grim confirmation. It was like their darkest predictions had finally, horribly, come true.
And the sheer scale of it all, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. The world wasn't just burning in a few places. No, it was being consumed by fire on a global scale. We're talking infernos raging across vast, unimaginable areas.
And believe it or not, the fire was just one piece of the puzzle. Over on the U.S. northeastern shore, it was this terrifying trifecta of disasters. Tremendous storms, massive floods, and the ground just constantly shaking from earthquake activity. A nonstop assault on everything. But here's the thing. All that immediate chaos, the storms, the fire, that was really just the symptom. The true cause was hidden, shrouded in this mysterious, persistent darkness that just blanketed the world. And that lingering darkness, it had a source. A single, world-altering nuclear blast had detonated roughly 150 miles off the U.S. northeastern coast. The mushroom clouds from this one event were so powerful, so vast, they literally blotted out the sun, completely. For days, there was no sunrise, no sunset. It became impossible to even know what time it was, trapping survivors in this timeless, lightless nightmare. So while these huge tidal waves were just demolishing the coasts, all the way from Rhode Island to Maryland, the survivors on the ground couldn't have known the true horror that was actually setting in. All that debris in the air was triggering an impact winter, a long, long period of extreme cold that would become the next great threat to their survival.
For the terrified survivors on the ground, the why of it all was a complete and terrifying mystery. Was it war? An accident? Some act of God? They had no answers, only the devastation right in front of them.
But then, after 3 days of relentless terror, something finally shifted. The very first signs of human resilience began to appear, and they weren't sparked by hope, but by a subtle change in the world around them. The key change was the sound. For 36 agonizing hours after the initial blasts, the world had just rumbled and shaken without a pause. But on day 3, that constant roar finally began to subside into a faint, distant quiet. This slight shift, this tiny reduction in the constant, terrifying noise, it was just enough. It gave the first survivors the fragile bit of courage they needed to leave their shelters, to unblock their doors, and to just peek out and witness the true scale of the devastation for the very first time. So as these first few people emerged, they were confronted with a new and really profound reality. The noise of destruction had been replaced by this eerie, unnatural silence. They were utterly and completely alone. And nobody, absolutely nobody, could grasp the full magnitude of the damage because the modern world had gone silent. The internet, television, phones, all of it was offline. The web that connected all of humanity had been severed. It was a total information blackout. This created this really stark and jarring contrast, depending on where you were. For most people out on the periphery of the disaster zones, there was just a deafening silence and total isolation. But further inland, some could just begin to hear the faint sound of sirens, the very first signs that some form of organized rescue was at least trying to begin.
And this quote really captures the central paradox for the survivors. They were surrounded by the evidence of what had happened, but they had no real information about what had actually happened, or how much of the world was even left.
And into this vacuum of facts and information, a new and maybe even more dangerous kind of chaos began to take shape. The fight for survival was shifting into a fight for the narrative itself.
As these small groups of people and the few surviving politicians began to regroup, leaders started to emerge from the rubble.
In the absence of any real authority, they were ready to step in, and each one of them had their own version of the story to explain the unexplainable. And this is what rushes in to fill the void left by truth. Without any news or data or any official word, the air became thick with speculation, with wild conspiracy theories, and these fantastic stories designed to make some kind of sense of the senseless.
And this is the provocative question the story really leaves us with. It sets the stage for the next great conflict in this fractured world. Because when the facts are all gone and the world is in ruins, whose story becomes the truth? That battle might just prove to be as brutal as the battle for survival itself.